Welcome to Game Plan. I'm Shivan Chanana. Ahead of the talks in Geneva between US, Ukraine and European partners to discuss US 28-point peace plan with Ukraine, the message seemed to be clear to Ukraine. And these are some of the statements which came from the US side, that a deal had to be reached one way or another. That's something US President Donald Trump said himself, that Ukraine has no gratitude. That was a message sent out directly to Zelensky over social media. And what was also mentioned is that Ukraine needs to say yes, or the terms will only get worse for them. On the other hand, Russia was not on this table, but it seemed like it did not even need to be there, as it remains steady on its core demands of slashing Ukraine's NATO ambitions, cutting Ukraine's military, and changing the front lines on Ukraine's east. Is Ukraine getting cornered into a peace deal? Does Ukraine have any other option at this point? Is this peace on Russia's terms? Joining me on Game Plan is Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, International Affairs Analyst, author and historian. Dr. Doctorow, thanks so much for joining me here. Is this peace on Russia's terms?
In a sense, yes, because basic demands of Russia that the core issues be addressed were present in the 28 points. This has been denounced by various critics, saying that it is not a legal document. Indeed, it isn't. It is directional. It was pointing to the issues that have to be resolved in final negotiations, and all of the issues that the Russians raised were there in that 28-point plan.
Dr. Doctorow, now, if Kiev agrees to this, in a way, Moscow gets exactly what it wanted ever since 2022 or even 2014. But if Kiev disagrees, it's deemed ungrateful, and that, the remarks, the terms being used for Ukraine, in essence, essentially mean that they'll eventually have to say yes. Do you see it that way?
The talks in Geneva, which took place on Sunday and yesterday, indicate that the plan has been seriously modified to accommodate the most important objections of the Ukrainians. That is not a good sign. The 28-point peace plan was barely acceptable to the Russians. Any deletion from that makes it almost certainly unacceptable. And let me just straighten things out. This was a peace plan not for Russia and Ukraine. It's a peace plan for Europe. And behind the scenes, the most important element is the position of the European Union. Russia is fighting in a proxy war now directed by the European Union, and the European Union's desiderata, their wishes to extract terms from the 28-point plan, seem to have been forwarded successfully by the leaders of the Ukrainian delegation yesterday in Geneva, which is not a good sign for this plan succeeding.
Understood. Let me bring it down to now what Zelensky said, that he said that he'll have to discuss territorial issues, which is a core issue for Ukraine, among others. He wants to discuss that with Donald Trump, and he was ready to go to Washington. That meeting was scheduled as early as within this week, and now, the White House has made it clear that there is not going to be any meeting between Trump and Zelensky. Does that November 27th deadline, which Trump had given to Ukraine, still hold to agree to these terms?
Well, maybe in his second term in power, Mr. Trump has issued on many different matters deadlines. Those deadlines have been always bypassed, and new deadlines are set. And I think that's the case with the current issue of the 28-point or 19-point now peace plan. It will slip past the 27th of November. And even because the best thing that can happen is that Mr. Trump and Mr. Zelensky will reach agreement on the plan by Thursday. That's not the plan. That's not a successful completion to this process. The Russians have to sign on, and there is no indication that they will sign on to the terms of a gutted peace plan, which is what came out of Geneva. Now, let me just point something out. The issue of territory has been highlighted by all Western critics of the peace plan. That is the least of the issues. The issue that is foremost in the minds of the Russians is to put an end to this conflict, to remove the sources of confrontation, so there will be no more war and no more need to prepare security guarantees and remilitarize Europe to support Ukraine and to support itself in a conflict with Russia foreseen for 2029. That is the point, not whether they receive this or that part of the Donbass.
Dr. Doctorow, you've touched upon a number of aspects. Let's quickly get into each one of them. As far as the security guarantees are concerned, what kind of security guarantees can be assured for Ukraine? And is this the end of Ukraine's NATO ambitions if this peace plan goes through?
Well, the last point, of course, it's the end of their NATO ambitions. That is a given. I think even in the gutted version of the peace plan following the talks in Geneva with the Ukrainians, I'm sure that nobody questioned Ukraine being kept out of NATO. But that is not the whole story. The question is, what are the Europeans going to do? Does this leave them with the possibility of inserting 5,000, 10,000 troops into Ukraine to provide a tripwire guarantee of Ukraine's security, which is the latest story coming out of Britain and France? Or is this a final settlement which removes the reasons for having security guarantees? If there's no more confrontation, if the issues dividing the countries is resolved in a document, then security guarantees are irrelevant.
And Dr. Doctorow, we also discussed the front lines briefly in the previous response from you. What happens to the new front line in Eastern Europe? Will there be buffer zones? Will those areas now be with Russia? What happens there?
Well, the 28-point peace plan that was on the table last week indicated that buffer zones would be created from the territories in Donbass, that is primarily in Donetsk Oblast, which the Ukrainians would cede to the Russians, would withdraw from, and the Russians would not have a right to militarize, that is, to put troops into. That would be de facto a buffer zones. These are the only incidents of buffer zones that were foreseen in the original plan. As to the relations between Europe and Ukraine and Russia, the original plan spoke about keeping Western forces, namely NATO jets, in Poland, not basing anything in Ukraine. We don't know how that issue has been addressed in the revised plan.
Dr. Doctorow, thanks so much for joining me here on Game Plan and discussing this. This plan, as I understand, is now going to go to Russia, whether they agree to it or not, whether they agree to those buffer zones, whether they agree to a change in the front lines, whether they agree to the demilitarization or terms that Ukraine would have perhaps put across, that remains to be seen. But as far as Marco Rubio and the US side is concerned, they said it was they called it a tremendous progress in terms of talks. What that progress is, that remains to be seen, because for US, they just want to get this deal done. Trump wants that feather in his cap again. And of course, there is a lot of killing happening on the front lines, which remains the most grim reality at this point. Let's see how this one pans out. That was Dr. Doctorow joining me here on Game Plan.
Thanks for the invitation.